Question 6. Complete the table of values for y equals x squared minus 3x plus 1. Well, if x equals to 4, substituting into our quadratic, every time I see x, I'm now going to substitute 4. So instead of having x squared, I'm now going to have 4 in brackets squared. Negative 3x in algebra means negative 3 multiplied by x. In this case, negative 3 multiplied by x. In this case, x is 4. And I've still got plus 1. I know 4 squared means 4 multiplied by itself, and 4 times 4 gives us 16. Negative 3 times 4 gives us negative 12. So 16 take away 12 is 4, and 4 add 1 gives us 5. Therefore, when x is 4, y therefore equals 5. Repeating this process now for when x equals 3. Therefore, instead of having x squared, I'm now going to have 3 in brackets squared. And again, negative 3x means negative 3 multiplied by x. In this case, x equals 3. And I've still got the plus 1 on the end. I know that 3 squared means 3 times 3, which is 9. Minus 3 times 3 will give us negative 9. Well, 9 take away 9 is 0. And 0 add 1 gives us 1. Therefore, when x is 3, y equals to 1. Once again, repeating this process now for when x equals 2. So substituting into our quadratic, instead of having x squared, I'm now going to have 2 squared. Minus 3x means minus 3 multiplied by x. In this case, x is 2. And I've still got the plus 1 on the end. Well, 2 squared means 2 multiplied by itself, and 2 times 2 is 4. Negative 3 times 2 gives us negative 6, and 4 take away 6 gives you negative 2, and negative 2 add 1 gives us negative 1. Hence, when x is 2, y equals negative 1. Repeating this process now for when x equals negative 1. Therefore, x squared, as x is negative 1, will become negative 1 in brackets squared. Minus 3x means minus 3 multiplied by x. In this case, x equals negative 1, and I've still got the plus 1 on the end. We know negative 1 squared means negative 1 multiplied by itself. And negative 1 times negative 1 gives us positive 1. I know negative 3 times negative 1 gives us plus 3, as a negative times negative gives us a plus. So 1 add 3 is 4, and 4 add 1 gives us 5. Therefore, when x is negative 1, y is equal to 5. Part B. On the grid, draw the graph of y equals x squared minus 3x plus 1 for values of x from negative 1 to 4. Well, I've already found my table of values. Therefore, when drawing a graph, we always plot our coordinates first. Our coordinate is always x, y, i.e. we go along the corridor and then up or down the stairs. Look at my first coordinate. We have x is 4 and y is 5. So I go along positive 4 in the x direction, and I go up positive 5, and I put a little cross. Look at my next coordinate. I have 3, 1. So I go along positive 3 in my x, and up positive 1 in my y, and put a little cross. My next coordinate is 2, negative 1. So I go along positive 2 in the x, and I come down negative 1 in the y. My next coordinate is 1, negative 1. So I go along positive 1 in my x direction and down negative 1 in my y direction and put it across. My next coordinate is 0, 1. So I go nowhere in my x direction and I go up positive 1 in my y direction, put it across. And finally, negative 1, 5. I go negative 1 in the x direction and up positive 5 and put a little cross. As I'm asked to draw the graph and I see the highest power here is positive x squared. Therefore, I know it's going to be a parabola, i.e. U shape. Therefore, I'm going to join my points together with a smooth curve. Part C. Using your graph, find estimates for the solutions of the equation x squared minus 3x plus 1 equals to 0. If I compare my two equations, I can see the quadratic is exactly the same. As here I've got x squared minus 3x plus 1, and here I've got x squared minus 3x plus 1. So therefore, all I need to find is where y is equal to 0. And y equals to 0 is the same as the x-axis. Therefore, all I need to do is to read off my two solutions where my quadratic graph cuts the x-axis. In this case, it cuts at 0.4 and 2.6. A reminder, it said solutions, which is plural, which means I've got more than one answer. Question 7. Here are two cubes, A and B. As we're told they're cubes, therefore we know the length, the width, and the height are all the same. So for cube A, we're told the length is 3 semis, therefore the width is also 3 semis, and the height is also 3 semis. Likewise for cube B, as we're told the length is 4, as it's a cube, we know the length, the width, and the height are all the same. So if the length is 4, the width is also 4 semis, and the height is also 4 semis. We were asked to work out the density of cube A in the ratio to the density of cube B, and to give our answer in the form A to B, where A and B are integers. A reminder, an integer is a whole number. As we're working out density, our first step is to write down our formula triangle. Our formula triangle is my Dyson vacuum. Other vacuum cleaners are available, so MDV. As I want to work out the density of each cube, well, I know density is the letter D. When using a formula triangle, you always cover up the one you want. As I want the letter D, cover up D for density, and whatever you're left with is your formula. So on the top here, I've got M, which is my mass. I should know that a horizontal line in a formula triangle means divide. So therefore, density is mass divided by, on the bottom is V, and V stands for our volume. For cube A, we know it has a mass of 81 grams. To work out the volume, well, we know the volume of a cube is going to be the length times the width times the height in any order. And we know as it's a cube, length, width, and height are all the same. So as the length is 3, therefore it's going to be 3 times 3 times 3, or 3 cubed. 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 gives us 27. So the volume of the cube, therefore, is 27 centimeters cubed, as it's a volume. As I want to work out density, therefore I know density is the mass on the top. We know the mass of cube A is 81. So it's 81 on the top, divided by V, the volume. In this case, the volume is 27. And 81 divided by 27 gives us 3. So the density is 3. For cube B, we know it has a mass of 128 grams. To work out its volume, we know it's going to be the length times the width times the height in any order. As it's a cube, we know length, width, and height are all the same. So it's going to be, in this case, 4 times 4 times 4, or 4 cubed. 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 times 4 gives us 64. So the volume is 64 centimeters cubed, as it's a volume. To work out density, we know density is the mass divided by the volume. So the mass of cube B was 128. So 128 on the top, divided by the volume, which just worked out to be 64. And 128 divided by 64 gives us 2. We were asked to give our answer in the form of A to B, where A and B are integers. Hence, my final answer is going to be the ratio of 3 to 2. Question 8. The table shows the amount of snow in centimetres that fell each day for 30 days. And we're asked to work out an estimate for the mean amount of snow per day. When calculating an estimate for the mean from a grouped frequency table, our first step is to add 2 additional columns. Our first column is called our midpoint. And our last column is our midpoint multiplied by our frequency. To find the midpoint for each class interval, all we do is go in the middle. In this case, what's in between 0 and 10? In this case, the midpoint therefore will be 5. What's in between 10 and 20? Well, our midpoint would be 15. What's in the middle of 20 and 30? Well, our midpoint would be 25. Again, what's in the middle of 30 and 40? In this case, 35. And what's in the middle of 40 and 50? In this case, 45. If you can't spot what's in the middle, to find the midpoint, you can just add up the lower and the upper bound and always divide by 2. So, for example, 0 add 10 and then divide by 2. Well, 0 add 10 is 10 and 10 divided by 2 gives us 5. So the midpoint for our first class interval is 5. We now multiply the midpoint by its frequency for each row. So 5 times 8 will give us 40. 15 times 10 will give us 150. 25 times 7 will give us 175. 35 times 2 will give us 70. And finally, 45 times 3 will give us 135. We now always total our midpoint times our frequency. So total just means to add them up. So 40, add 150, add 175, add 70, add 135. That comes to 570. And we always total our frequency column. In this case, 8 add 10, add 7, add 2, add 3 comes to 30. We know in this case our frequency should represent the total number of days. In this case, 30, which it does. As we're asked to work out an estimate for the mean, it's always the total of our midpoint times frequency. In this case, our 570. And it's always divided by our total frequency. In this case, our total frequency in the number of days, in this case, is 30. Simplify my fraction. As they both end in 0, I can divide the top and the bottom by 10, i.e. cancel a 0. That brings me down to 57 over 3. The number we're dividing by always goes outside the bus stop, so it's going to be 3, and on the inside, 57. How many times does 3 divide into 5? It goes in 1 whole time, and as I've got 5, the remainder is 2. How many 3's go into 27? We know it goes in 9 times, as 9 times 3 is 27. Hence, 57 divided by 3 gives us 19.